Well, greetings to each of you, and welcome to season three of the Shakedown. I am your host, Aaron Dawson. It is so awesome to be back with you. We are so excited to be able to join with you for a third season of the Shakedown. When we started this, if you'd asked me uh, about the third season, I said, hang on a second, we're still trying to figure out season one, but I am so glad to be with you. Looking forward to a great season three. I'd like to start right out by saying we're going to be doing some different things this season, trying some different looks and layouts and styles of presentation and information. We've got an exciting season ahead, and so I encourage you to check in and keep up with what's going on. You can find us on theshakedown.org, the website, or the best case scenario, go to YouTube, search the Shakedown Podcast, and you'll find it there. Let me encourage you too, once you go find it on YouTube, even if you like to listen, go find it on YouTube. Help us out. Subscribe, hit the like button. That you would not believe how much that helps us get this information out there to folks, and helps the effect and the impact of this podcast grow. So please do that. Go find it on YouTube. Hit the subscribe, hit the like button, anywhere you can find it, and let people know. Let people know. It is amazing to me how many people, and over the last few years that I've talked to, that did all over the country, but then also those that hadn't heard of it. So get the word out there. Well, as we get this season three started, we've always had as our theme that this podcast, that it's about corrections, for corrections, and by corrections. And we want to use that as kind of our focus, our mission statement, if you will, our outline for this season. And starting in that frame of mind, in the last few months, there has been something that has come up in dealing with corrections, and that is some legislation, a bill that was submitted in the House of Representatives and also simultaneously in the United States Senate, a bill that impacts or could impact what you and I do on a daily and a regular basis. And so, getting started on season three, this was already there looming, and so we wanted to hit that full stride. And so, to help us with that, I'm tickled to death to be able to interview Mr. Tate McCotter, the Executive Director of NIJO, the National Institute of Jail Operations. And so, looking forward to speaking with him today. And so, uh, as always, I hope this is a benefit and an encouragement to you. But without further ado, let's jump into that interview. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, starting off season three with a bang, the one and only Tate McCotter, the Executive Director with the National Institute for Jail Operations. Tate, welcome to the podcast. Glad you could join us today and to talk about a topic that, for many of our listeners, they may not know that it's even happening. Um, and we want to discuss a piece of legislation, technically two pieces of legislation. But before we get into the legislation, I think it's important that we recognize why this legislation came about. And I know you'll be able to understand what I'm saying as a husband, as a father. Um, you understand there are times as a husband and a father, you recognize there's a problem, okay? And you want to fix the problem. You want to be the go-to man, the knight in shining armor. You want to be the hero. And so you set out to address the problem. And when you bring your solution to those that you are trying to be the hero for, and you're reading facial expressions and you're reading body language, you get a sense pretty quick that my heroic moment of being the knight in shining armor has crashed and burned, because my solution doesn't line up with what I thought was the problem, or I've gone overboard, or whatever the case may be. And I think that that's what we're seeing with this legislation. And the problem is the issue of solitary confinement. Um, And research has shown that in jails and in uh, state facilities, that isolating somebody from a purely, we'll say a purely sociological or psychological perspective, just in that framework, is a negative. We're not designed to be isolated as human beings. We're not designed to be um, kept from any human interaction or confined to a small area. So when you look at it from, again, a purely sociological or psychological perspective, I think we would be in agreement with, okay, that's not ideal. But when you look at it from a correctional standpoint, which I think is the problem, is that there are so few people that understand in a correctional environment what why is it necessary to isolate people at times. um, and I read through this bill, and I know you have crafted a response on behalf of the Western State Sheriff Association, as well as just corrections at large. So I guess to just get this ball rolling, what are your thoughts on the problem that are we addressing the right problem, or is it a semantics issue? Where's the conflict coming from?
Sure. No, thank you. So, um, I guess first I would say we live in a pretty divisive world where there's us versus them, and certainly when it comes to what we do inside correctional facilities, um, I think it's fair to say that unfortunately there's that mentality exists, right? Where it does sometimes feel like for those that work in corrections, they might look at the public and go, they don't get it, they don't understand. What they're saying is not accurate. That's not what we do. That's not how we use it. On the flip side, you have the general public that um, perhaps hasn't been inside a facility before, and what they know or what they think they know um, is based on perhaps it could be the term itself, right? Well,
Sure,
solitary
sure.
confinement. What? Geez, that sounds horrible. I mean, wow, you guys take people, you lock them up, you throw away the key. It's a draconian, dark, wet, dungeon, and I'm not suggesting that everybody is thinking, yeah, that's exactly what our jails look like, but you just don't know. And
Right.
so I think part of the problem is that we really need to, and I say we, um, I think it starts with us on a correctional standpoint, is to maybe tear down a little bit of these walls and say it's not us versus them. Um,
Sure.
the issue that we're really talking about, if you think about it, jails have become a temporary intermediate solution to the biggest problems that our communities have, which they don't have answers for, right?
Correct.
And
Yes.
so when you talk about taking individuals that have broken the law, that something bad has happened out there, crimes have been committed, and in our country, in the United States, the answer to that when something goes bad is we have confinement, right? I guess it's a lot better than in some places where they just take care of business on their own and they disappear.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting that our criminal justice system is perfect, because I think we all would agree on that one, that it needs work. Um,
Yes.
but the point is where corrections kind of comes in is whatever happens out there on the street. Um, they come into a facility and the corrections people just have, look, here it is. This is yours now.
Yes.
So we want you to take care of this problem, and we want you to do it safely. We want you to do it humanely. We want you to do it in a cost-effective way,
Right.
um, and be efficient with it. And I think that's a fair ask. Now, certainly, there's a whole lot of components that are mixed in with that. We've got to have adequate staffing, adequate budgets, adequate facilities. We've got to have officers that are trained. They've got to know what they're doing. We want to make sure that we're running facilities according to what, constitutional requirements exist out there and statutory laws. And so there's a whole lot swirling around it. But going back to your point, though, this thing, solitary confinement, I don't like the term. I don't like the word. I know in courts they still refer to it. I mean, the Supreme Court has used that term, solitary confinement. But I I would really say this. I I don't think that term remotely describes the practice that is utilized by correctional administrators anywhere in this country, nor has it for a long time. Now, that's not to say, with the spotlight on this subject, that agencies haven't re-looked at it and said, "Hey, can we do this smarter? Can we do this better? Let's look at our reclassification process. Let's look at things that we're doing to make sure that that when it's used appropriately, right?"
Yes.
But
Yes.
I think the term really needs to be talked about because it's just misunderstood. Do you know where the term penitentiary came from?
Mm-mm.
So if you look back in history, and let's go back to the United States, although this was used well before that,
Right.
the word penitentiary comes from the word penance.
That makes
If
sense.
somebody's being penitent, they're looking at themselves going, what can I do to change, to be better, to improve?
Right.
And penitentiaries were established. For example, in Quaker land in Pennsylvania, the word penitentiary meant somebody's being placed there because they've messed up, they've made a mistake, and by being in a penitentiary, they have time and the ability to refocus and figure out, hey, what did I do? How do I stop doing that so that I can go back into society and be a better, more productive citizen?
Yeah.
That was how it was being utilized. Now, certainly that doesn't have the same connotation now. When you
Yes.
say I'm going to the pen, I don't think people think Quaker mentality anymore.
Right.
So, and solitary back then was not a bad thing. To be in a solitary mode and mindset. You
Sure.
were really being contemplative, right? Of choices of your own self
Right.
and trying to figure out, next steps.
Yes.
So, all right, what do we call it then? What's the right term? What do you think?
Well, and I was thinking as you were saying that looking at this bill, the first thing they say in this bill is that the use of solitary confinement as a carceral practice causes devastating harm and constitutes a form of torture. I mean, that's right out of the gate. And so, what you're saying right there as a perspective is that they are viewing the use of quote unquote solitary confinement as a means of punishment. That you have come to this jail and we're gonna show you, buddy. We're gonna stick it to you. We're gonna make sure that you learn your lesson, et cetera, et cetera. And to answer your question, from working in a facility, there are times where you have to separate people from other people. You have children. I have children. There's times where you have to say to your children, okay, you go over there, you go over there, because this is not jihad. This is not working. And when you think about it from the administrative segregation side, that okay, you have an inmate that situational personality conflict, history, the demeanor in the dorm that they're in. There has to be a period of separation where I segregate or separate this person from these people, or however many it is, whether it be for protective custody, whether it be they need to calm down, whether it be medically, that we think this person might have an illness, and so we have to separate them. I mean, we just coming out of COVID where that was standard practice, that it was expected that you separate people from other people because the medical. So you look at it from that perspective. there are times where that is going to be necessary. And then you factor in the mental health aspect. And what you said was right on board, is that for so many communities, it's we don't feel it's safe, right, good, beneficial, whatever, for this individual to be in the society or the culture at large. They need to be somewhere else than right here. Okay. Well, the fact of the matter is that ends up being jail. And so you have someone who has a mental illness, and most mental illnesses, the biggest issue they have is social interaction. So you send them to a jail where everybody is in a much more restrained, controlled environment, and the issues they had in the culture, in the society, now they're having it in the jail. And for their safety and for the safety of others, there are going to be times where you have to separate them from the rest of the people. So to answer your question, y'all say the administrative requirements of operating a facility require at times that you do segregate folks.
Right. And no, I appreciate that, Aaron. Like when it comes to terminology there, um, I I think it also needs to be understood. Um, okay, so if it's not solitary confinement, we've already talked about that. It's not that same sort of circumstance.
Right.
A lot of our profession has shifted from using that terminology to restrictive housing, right? You'll hear that
Yes.
word, or
Yes.
segregation. There's other terms that sometimes I'll hear: isolation, protective custody. I mean, there's different things, and it always relates usually back to classification of some sort.
Yes.
But to your point, I'm going to go back to maybe if I was a person who had never been inside a jail before, and I'm really approaching your question based on I know who a lot of our audience is corrections, but we need to be able to articulate this and explain it because the public doesn't understand. And you go back to the bill and see how this is written. Um, we need to educate. We
Yes.
need to be able to clearly articulate what it is, right? When it's
Right.
used, for whom it's used, how it's utilized.
Sure.
I think even the falsehood out there that, oh, well, solitary confinement is everybody gets it. That's just not
Right.
true.
And if I'm a
It is
citizen,
as a management tool when it's necessary.
sure.
And then a public might go, okay, well, tell me about that. When is it necessary? You use terminology like admin seg. Well, we are really good in corrections at just spitting off terms, right?
Right.
You've been in a jail or a prison for a short amount of time, and you know that term, but the public doesn't know that. And
Right.
so, what is the difference between admin seg or disciplinary seg? Because you started off saying the act itself says it's a form of torture. That implies that the usage of this is directly going back to disciplinary. Somebody did something to tick somebody off, and we are going to use that as a means
Right.
of punishment to control you. And I would dare venture to say that the majority of time that this tool is utilized is not for disciplinary, although it does be used for disciplinary, but
Right.
it's more often than not used for medical and for administrative purposes.
Yes.
Now, we need to be able to talk about the differences between those. Let's start off with the hot one. So when would you use disciplinary segregation, or when would you separate? And I'm going to use the word separate because
Sure.
really when you say um, you know restrictive housing or something like that, again, maybe the public doesn't understand this, but what we're really doing is separating somebody from another group of population out of necessity to keep them from harming others or themselves, right?
Yes. Yes.
This goes back to duty to protect and deliberate indifference. We need to do the best job that we possibly can so that they don't get hurt, either hurting themselves or hurting others. Um,
Yes.
so this really is a case by case, individualized basis. It's not like willy nilly. Oh, somebody came in, just put them over here, lock them up. That's not how that works. So
Right.
what? when would you use disciplinary? Let's break that one down. How is disciplinary used? For whom is it used?
Well, and again, I go back to the fact of being a parent. You know, you have multiple children, I have multiple children. The punishment that works for this child won't work on this child. Personality, the severity of what they did, the amount of discipline that you need to do to get their attention, change behavior, et cetera, et cetera. From a correctional perspective, as an administrator, I told my guys constantly, find out, number one, what happened and what is the best response tailored to what happened. If if it's a safety issue, as in they assaulted somebody, or they were involved in a group of people trying to instigate assault of somebody. Okay, they've demonstrated that they're a risk to their own safety or the safety of someone else. Therefore, I have to separate them. If we're talking about, they refuse to wear their jail uniform in the day room like they're supposed to. Okay, me separating them from the rest of the inmate population is probably not the best fit. That's not going to solve the issue. That's not going to be the problem. So I'm going to go for something else. I'm going to look at visitation or commissary or a host of other things that I can use as disciplinary action. But separation is tied to safety. 100% of the time, it's tied to safety.
So you reminded me of something. I was talking to a reporter a couple of weeks ago that was asking me about a couple of questions, particularly with housing somebody in this space with administrative SAG or disciplinary SAG. And she referred to this term as solitary confinement. And I said, you make it sound as if we relish in putting somebody in there.
Right.
And I said, can I just tell you a little secret? And she says, what? And I said, we hate it. I said, it's actually almost a punishment. You bring up your kids. If I ground my child, am I grounding my child or am I grounding me? Because yeah, I mean, it's costly. It's much more difficult for us to administer, to help to be engaged with that individual than if they were in general population. And so this idea or mindset that somehow we get kicks and jollies about locking somebody up and putting them in this separated state, that's just a falsehood. It's not true. By any and all means, we try to keep them with general population as to the best of our ability. But there will be times, as you mentioned, where you just can't put somebody with somebody else. And it could be on an individual basis. I don't like that guy. And if you put me around that guy, I'm going to take a shot at him. It's not like our jails either right now have the same type of populations that we had even 10 years ago. I think COVID proved that we've got just a load of felonies, and those misdemeanors and our felonies are this. So, you think about the type of population we have where gangs are more prevalent. Those that are more violent are in there. I remember watching a video of a guy that was being interviewed. He was a pretty high gang member, and he said in there, in our facilities or any jail facility or prison, he says there's two groups. There's sharks and there's guppies. You're either predator or you're a prey. He says, and I choose to be a great white.
Yeah.
So again, from the public's perception, I would ask, where would you want us to put that individual?
Right.
I mean, do you want me to put him in a place where he has complete access, has made it very clear by his actions, words, and everything else that he's not going to obey the rules, right? He is going to take a shot and he will hurt somebody. It's not just officer and inmate related. This is inmate to inmate. So in some ways, and it sounds really kind of, this isn't a poetic statement, but it is actually the most humane and civil thing to do would be to separate them for the safety of that person and other people.
Yes, yes, yes. And to kind of bring this all together, because as often happens in our conversation state, we tend to We tend to run out of time quickly. But to kind of bring this back together, um, one, I think we would agree there is definitely a problem. You know, the culturally, and the jails are simply a reflection of that cultural issue. Two, um, there is not a motivation from corrections at large, individual officers, to harm or to punish anyone. The point is, we are tasked to provide care for these individuals, to provide a controlled environment, and to make sure that they stay within custody at the discretion of the courts. This bill that was submitted, their solution is to end solitary confinement, to end it completely, to take it off the board. Well, having worked in a jail as a line officer, mid-level supervisor, all the way up through to administration, I can tell you that if I have the great white shark, and okay, I have him in this dorm over here in general population, and he's acting like a great white shark. Okay, I take him out of that body of water, and I move him in this body of water. I've just given him a new pool to swim around in, with new victims to try to manipulate, take advantage of, harm, assault, etc. That a behavioral based approach, which is what classification is, you look at charges and you look at behavior. A behavioral based approach to housing in a facility is the only way that you can do it safely, and the only way that you can do it in a way to where it removes the I don't like that guy, or that guy looks like this, or that guy's from this area, or this guy's whatever. No, it's based on your charges. It's based on your behavior. And if your behavior demonstrates that you are not able to be in general population, I'm going to have to separate you for a period of time. And to me, that seems like the only logistical way to do it, in which we're keeping people safe. We're not spending more money. I mean, because you look at some of the things they put in this bill, 7 hours of program time per day. I read that and I thought, who's doing it and who's paying for it? I mean, you say it's a financial burden, which it is, but the solution is 7 hours a day of program time. You know, there has to be a
And 14
legit.
hours of out of cell, 1 hour of the rack, which isn't that big of a deal, but it also called for contact social visitation without physical barriers. I
Yes,
know that in itself would be like, what? I mean, so it's one thing to say, don't use it, and to say don't use it ever is even there is no solution in this bill, but some of the things that are proposed in here, uh, if anyone had been consulted who worked in our environment by those
right.
that have proposed this legislation, in either one, the House bill or the Senate bill, um, they would immediately tell you, if you enact this the way it is written, with absolute guarantee, somebody's going to get hurt badly to the point of death, period.
Yes, yes,
Somebody's going to get hurt bad.
yes,
It's incredibly alarming, um, how loose this is written, um, to the point that I almost wonder if they have forgotten the fact that the way they've written this, for the people that they say that they're trying to protect, will actually harm them more than help them. How many inmates have, and you know this, will actually go to you and say, I don't want to be with the rest of the population. I need this
yes,
space. We have
yes,
those that are autistic that have a really hard time dealing with others. We have those that are mentally ill, and I use this example often in training, but to the public, if you take somebody, and by the way, let's look at our population. When most facilities are saying 7 out of 10 individuals that come in have some
yes,
sort of mental illness, and you're
right.
putting all of those individuals together, what happens if I'm that guy that for whatever reason, strips down naked, and I grab my feces and I start smearing him on the wall, and I'm assigned to be his cellmate.
Right. Yes.
It doesn't take rocket science to figure out that that guy's going to get hurt.
Right. Yes.
Somebody is not going to understand his state of mind and go, "You do that again, right?" Or "Stop now," and it doesn't stop.
Right.
Game on. You talked about charges, right? If you're a child molester and you're bragging about it in a facility, guess what I did to that 5-year-old?
Right.
You're going to have a problem. And
Yes.
again, we have this responsibility. And this is where you get into administrative separation, where it's not a punishment at all. This is non-punitive. And
Right.
in corrections, we need to be able to explain the difference between admin and disciplinary and medical, because they're all different. In this
Yes.
admin space, this is not punitive, right? It's a classification tool. And this goes back to duty to protect and deliberate indifference, where we have to isolate or separate individuals that would be posing a threat to others. And that's the best way that we need to be able to say this better than we've been saying it.
Yes. Well, I say Tate is kind of a takeaway for those that are listening. One, by all means, stay informed on what's going on, of these kind of things coming up. But two, don't be afraid to, when these questions get asked in your family, in your community, whatever the case may be, to lay out for these people, this is what this is really about. They see something on the news or whatever the case may be. Okay, look, this is really what's going on. And educate the folks in the community about this is what it's really like. This is what it really takes, so that when people have questions, they don't look to legislators who, again, have never set foot in a correctional facility either to come up with a solution, but to look to those that are doing it and are trusted by the community. I work for a sheriff's office. My boss was an elected official. The citizens elected him to be the sheriff and to operate a facility, so that they look to us as the professionals rather than condemning us as the problem, the source of the problem.
Yeah, no, so true. As you look at this legislation out there, you've probably heard it said before. If you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
I think there's a lot of administrators that I've taught. I just got back from Western State Sheriff's Conference and spoke there about this topic, and they wrote a resolution opposing it, and I commend them for just great work and being able to craft a really good resolution that articulates a lot of the points that we're discussing right now. I know we put ours out with NIJO as well, about a month ago, but you know we need to have not just a seat at the table, but we really almost need the seat at the head of the table, because people really need to understand what is going on here.
All right. Well, talking about classification, talking about the length of time that somebody is in separation, admin seg, whatever the case may be. It the perspective often is that it's just arbitrary. That I had a bad day at home, and so therefore I decide I come in, and you know what, you're going to you're going to admin seg, but like we were talking about, that's not the way that works.
Absolutely, yeah, and again, there are so many different other options besides the separation. So we need to make that clear, that there's major
Sure.
infractions, there's minor infractions, there's all these others, but
Yes.
when necessary, because of the threat to safety, security, right? All of these other things that we discussed, where somebody could get hurt themselves, others,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but when it comes to on the disciplinary side of things, that usually requires due process for those major violations.
Right.
And when that happens, there's an allocated time, right? That's identified. It's finite. For example, it
Yes.
might be
Yes.
1 to 15 days, depending on the severity of whatever happened. And so I think that needs to be better articulated as well, so that people that aren't part of our world understand it's not what is being portrayed out there, right?
Yes. Yes. So when we take this, we look at this legislation and we know what prompted it. We know, again, as we said before, there is a problem. But if I'm a corrections officer and I'm listening to this podcast, what do I need to take away from listening to our conversation? What would be, I guess you say, the bullet points? Step one, step two, step three. What would I need to take away from listening to this conversation?
Thank you. It's a great question. One of the things that I've been thinking the most about this as I've gone through this legislation is number one, just be aware.
Okay. Yeah.
So often we live in our 3-foot world, which is great. We can only control what we can control,
Right.
but um, we certainly need to be aware, especially when legislation is proposed of that involves anything to do with us. As I mentioned, we need to have a seat at the table. So we need to be informed. We need to be aware. Please read this. Just
Yes.
read it. I mean, so often, I mean, it's easy to complain, but let's be informed. Let's know
Yes.
what's going on and read through this. And I mean, I've got a copy of 4972 here. 3409 is pretty much its companion bill. There's very little difference between the two. But as you go through this, it's important that you just don't say, hey, oh, the name of this is End Solitary Confinement Act. I don't like that. Oppose it. Well, know it. Know what's in here and what you're opposing. So don't take my word for it. Don't take your word for it. Read it. That would be number one. Number two is do something about it.
Mm.
If after you've read it, you have feelings, and I sure hope you do,
Right.
those need to be shared. And let's talk to people. Let's get out there. The fact that jails are generally run across the country by sheriffs. Over what 70-80% of all the jails are run by sheriffs. Sheriffs are elected position. That means
Right.
they have touches with a lot of stakeholders, if you will, in our space. We need to make sure that this message is getting out there. That means as jail administrators and those that work in the profession, we need to make sure that those talking points of what you know here after you've read this are clearly communicated so that it's not just a soundbite of no, it's,
Right.
hey, this thing out here calls for the end of a necessary administrative tool that we desperately need. And by the way, there's no solution in here. It's
Right.
it's costly to do whatever that they're proposing to do. In some cases, I would argue it's almost impossible to do what they're asking us to do.
Right.
Um, the fact that somebody's going to get hurt badly, explain that. That it creates liberty interest for inmates by far superseding what laws are out there. There's just so many things that you can dissect, and we have talking points. If anybody wants to, they can talk. They call us, look on our website, whatever you want, but articulate it. Be able to talk about it. The only thing beyond that, I would suggest that I would really like to see our folks doing is we've seen a lot of legislation lately that kind of poke their nose in the tent when it comes to running facilities on all different types of things. I mean, for the last decade, it's been all talk on PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and look what that's done in our profession. A lot of training, a lot of emphasis, a lot of it's been a lot. And we'll save that for another date. But my point is, as this legislation is being proposed, I find that the vast majority of it does not really address the root problem. And it goes back to where we started this conversation. Our our criminal justice system needs help.
Yeah.
It really needs help. And I think that's something where, again, let's stop this us versus them thing. We all know that this is broken and we need to fix it. So rather than passing legislation that just restricts to some degree, well, to a big degree in this case, of what you can and can't do in a facility and telling administrators, hey, we don't like that you're doing this. Stop that, stop whatever. You need to now
Right.
do this, but we're not going to fund it. We're going to tell you what not to do. We're not even going to define it, but don't do it. Um, what I think really needs to be a message that we need to put out there is let's focus on the root problem, please. The root
Right.
problem here is that we have a population that is inside our facility, that it's the worst possible thing for them, for us, for the communities, for their families. And I'm
Yes.
talking about the mentally ill.
Yes.
I mean, I can't
Yes.
imagine what would happen if we could take all of this ball of energy that our legislators have to promote and push this stuff out here that they're putting down, like these bills. Why in the world can't they do something to fix what happened after the Deinstitutionalization Act, where all of
Right.
those that had mental illnesses had at least some sort of funding mechanisms that were be driven with resources and things and places to go, and we don't have that now.
Right.
Jails are the largest dumping ground for the mentally ill population in our communities, and it is the
Yes.
worst place they could be. So rather than saying, hey, we know you have this population in here, now stop using solitary confinement on these mentally ill. How about this for a novel concept? Don't put them in there. Don't
Yes.
put them in there. We
Yes.
don't want to utilize it. They shouldn't be in there. Can we please focus on the real root issue? And so I would just highly press upon anybody who's hearing this, whether you are a corrections, officer, a supervisor, administrator, a sheriff, a warden, whether you are just somebody from the public that's interested in this, please do whatever you can to spread the word out there that it's the mentally ill population in our society that needs to be addressed.
Right.
That is our
Yeah.
problem. And so rather than focusing legislation on the fix it afterwards, that is not going to fix it, how about we
Right.
address it on the front end instead of being as ridiculous as we are? This is a horrible issue. We've got to fix it.
Yes, and I'll tell you is you saying that it reminded me, as a psychologist, you learn that what you see is almost never the problem. It's what's down here, way under what you see, that is really the problem, and you've got to walk with this individual to dig through these layers to get to the problem. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that. That as an administrator, my biggest, I won't even say frustration, I'll say my biggest concern was that you have these individuals that are suffering from a mental illness, whether it's substance abuse contributed or whatever the factors, they're in this state now where they have this mental illness. Their sense of reality, their sense of safety, and where they are and what they need to do to be safe and secure is in a place that jail is not going to be conducive for that, which puts them at jeopardy of doing something, that's going to jeopardize their safety, somebody else's safety. You have officers that, I'm just going to say, the training that officers, corrections officers receive, a large part of it is not dealing with mental illness. It's so they don't have necessarily all the tools they need, but they shouldn't have to have them if, like you said, the pressure was put on, okay, look, yes, this is a problem, but more importantly, this is a problem. Help us fix this, and this becomes a non-entity, um, because we've addressed the root cause of the challenge to the care, custody, and control in a facility. So yes,
Right.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We call it corrections, but we call it rehabilitation. I mean, there's terminology out there, but when you think of this issue right now, Aaron, we're talking about with the mentally ill and mental illness generally. Tell me how that really is going to work in a correctional setting.
Sure.
What are we supposed to rehabilitate and correct?
Right.
They need resources and care that will never happen, no matter how hard we try. And
Right.
again, these correctional institutions don't have unlimited reason. It's not like we have psychologists, right, or mental
Right,
health experts just sitting there going, "Come, please, I'm gonna be here
right,
for you." That
right,
does not
right,
happen. It is so much more costly doing it the way that we're doing it now than what it could be if Congress and others that can do something about this would address it on the front end rather than us dealing it on the back end. And I just wish we could figure this one out because it just seems like we keep going round and round and round on this. I mean, take what we spent again on PREA across the country for the resources and the time and energy. If you could take that bucket of all of that and have dumped it into the mentally and focusing on mental illness,
right.
would anybody argue that that would have been more productive?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, that would have been, and you would have seen fruits immediately.
Right.
Immediately. Yes, yes. And
This is not an us versus them, and
right,
it should never be. Politics has no place in our facilities. Um,
right,
we we talk about custody, control, and care. All of those things are components of we have a population that comes in. We don't pick and choose them.
yeah,
We've got to deal with it. And it's what makes this job so challenging. And bless every person that works in those facilities because it is the most thankless job out there.
right, right,
but but it sure would help if we could get some legislation that could focus on the real issue rather than just mitigating or curtailing or restricting these sidebar components that really won't address the root issue.
right, right. Yes, yes. So, you know, for those of you listening, watching, uh, please take what Tate has said. You know, be informed, know what's going on. I mean, with Google and all these, you know, with the search engines available. I mean, you can set a filter to where you know it'll send you links every day of you know legislation dealing with corrections or jails. Be informed. Um, you know, be informative. You know, make sure that you are a voice, defend not necessarily defending, but informing those that don't know what's really going on. And you know, and if you're a corrections officer, you know, talk to your family members and say, hey, this is what reality is like. How about we contact our legislator? How about we contact our senator? How about we contact, whether on the state level or the federal level, and say, look, I walk these hallways, or my family member walks these hallways. Here's the real deal. How about we do X, Y, or Z? So, Tate, I greatly appreciate your time this morning. I appreciate, and I'll tell you, I appreciate your tenacity and your passion on these topics. You know, because as a corrections officer, it becomes very easy to the walls confine your mindset sometimes, and you think this is all there is, and I'm confined right here. And to be reminded that there's other folks out there that are fighting the battle right alongside of you that support you. Man, what an incredible uh, wad of information, and what an awesome opportunity it was to talk to Tate. Glad to have him on, and glad to always enjoy the opportunity for he and I to interact and talk about this awesome career. But guys, take what he said. You know, be informed. Make sure you know what's going on. Be informative. Make sure that you offer the opportunity, the information to those that you come in contact with. You hear people talking about it, or people in your family, or friends, folks at church, folks at the ball field, whatever. Uh, get the information out there. You know, there's a lot of folks that have no idea what you or what I do for a living, and so uh, be informative. And then also be involved. Make sure that you know your representatives, whether on a local level, a state level, or even on the federal level, make sure that your representatives know how you feel about what legislation is being submitted and suggested, and what legislation should be submitted or suggested. Well, guys, this wraps up. This wraps up our first episode of season 3. I hope it's been enjoyable to you. As I mentioned, help us out. Do us a favor, go to YouTube, search the Shakedown Podcast, hit that subscribe button, listen to those episodes, hit the likes. Help us out with that. Get the word out there, and look forward to some awesome content. Well, guys, it's been a great first episode, and looking forward to the next one. But in the meantime, stay sharp, stay safe, stay vigilant. Godspeed.